Hi, my name is Imran Ahmed, the Chief Executive and founder of the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. We all know that social media has brought great benefits to society, bringing billions of people together, giving marginalised people a voice, forums, spaces in which to interact with each other. But we also all know that hate, disinformation, abuse and harassment have flourished on corporate social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, TikTok and YouTube. Truth is that social media and search engine companies have every incentive to facilitate the spread of hate and disinformation, and no incentive to regulate their platforms. Without the work of advocacy groups like CCDH, they have faced few legal or commercial consequences for spreading hate and lies. And they found that the controversy, the anger, the emotion are actually addictive, they're profitable. The more time they can keep people in a state of emotional anxiety, needing more and more fixes, the more they can keep their attention and, crucially, serve them ads. The handful of companies who dominate the internet economy have been allowed to commercialize and control digital public spaces used by over 5 billion people worldwide. That's nearly 7 in 10 of all humans on Earth. They own the primary spaces in which we share information, connect with each other, maintain relationships, conduct business. And believe me, every time they've been given the choice, they always put their personal profit ahead of people, users, society, our kids' safety, even our national security. The evidence is all around us. Sadly, our children are suffering an unprecedented mental health crisis, aggravated by the predominance of social media in their lives. The COVID pandemic was greatly exacerbated by the ubiquity of disinformation, which suppressed vaccine uptake and caused many thousands of needless deaths. Radicals and extremists carry out real-world violence after becoming inspired by hateful propaganda they found on mainstream sites. It's become too big a problem to ignore. According to polling, a significant majority of adults agree with the sentiment that online harms have a serious real-world impact. At the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, we've developed a deep understanding of how and why digital spaces go wrong, the actors, the systems, the culture. We studied the way anti-vaccine extremists, hate actors, climate deniers, misogynists weaponize platforms to spread lies and attack marginalized groups. Through our work, we've seen the depth and breadth of harm that tech companies are profiting from on a daily basis. What has remained consistent across all types of harmful content is that tech companies refuse to act. It's not that they don't have rules to prevent harm, they do, right? Every platform has pages and pages of guidelines and so-called community standards. When the cameras are rolling and when they find themselves in front of democratically elected lawmakers, tech executives pledge to enforce those rules. The problem is that it is cheaper, easier and more expedient to turn a blind eye to the horrors that arise on their platforms, even when it fuels radicalization, racism, misogyny and deadly disinformation. This is the reality of social media's era of self-regulation. So we need legislation that changes the incentives for social media companies, that affects their fundamental business models, and therefore the behavior of those companies and their executives. We need to create costs, social, political, but especially economic, for the production and distribution of hate and lies. Now, in 2022, CCDH identified a need to develop a framework to support global efforts to regulate social media and search engine companies. We called it the STAR framework. It's founded on 4 principles: safety by design, transparency, accountability, and responsibility for platforms, the companies, and the senior executives behind them. Through the STAR framework, we aim to establish key global standards for social media reform to ensure effectiveness and consistency for a sector whose reach impacts on people globally. Our polling shows that the public understands the need for such a regulatory framework and overwhelmingly agree with all 4 planks of our framework. So how does it work? Let's start with the S, safety by design. Look, time and again, we've seen platforms release products and features that they know aren't safe. Like children accessing 18+ worlds in Horizon Worlds, algorithms recommending to teenagers harmful eating disorder and self-harm content, Twitter spreading hate speech despite their terms and conditions prohibiting it, and that's just naming a few. It just ain't good enough. Safety by design involves deliberate and proactive choices by technology companies about the design and the implementation of their products and services so that they're safe for the public. In practice, it means making sure that the products and features, like the algorithms companies use to recommend content, are safe before they put them in front of millions of users, including kids. Look, in the automotive industry, cars need to pass rigorous safety checks before they're out for sale. A deli needs to make sure it isn't poisoning you with its ham and cheese sandwiches. Why are those industries subject to more regulation than companies which can really negatively affect our individual psychology, our communities, our families, our democracy? So what about T, transparency? Right now, platforms have the power to bury data, making it hard to drag problems into the light and hold folks accountable. Opaque, murky algorithms have been pivotal in promoting trending yet harmful content from influencers like Andrew Tate, or aggressively pushing content to teenagers about eating disorders. We also have no visibility of how algorithms discriminate against people, promote extremist content. There's an unsustainable asymmetry and imbalance of power, where technology companies are allowed to hold most of the information about their platforms and the impact they have. We need transparency, guaranteed by legislation, on how algorithms work, how platforms manage data. We need a clear complaint system and enforcement of community standards that is open to all, so we can all understand how, why, and when they make decisions that affect us all. And greater transparency of the economics. Look, ads make up the vast majority of social media companies' revenues, and we need to know how that affects what content they promote and what they demote. A, accountability. Look, regulation is most effective when there are clear lines of accountability in place. Accountability systems include enforcement, independent pathways for challenging decisions or omissions made by the technology companies. A comprehensive system would have a body that can deal with the systems, the drivers of harm, and has a broad range of intervention tools. This body could have key relationships with civil society, communities, researchers, and can work internationally with partners as part of a global effort to address online harm and disinformation. Finally, R, responsibility. Look, the final element has to be responsibility, both for social media platforms and search engine companies and their senior executives. When a platform fails to act to remove harmful content, offer sufficient transparency or other requirements under the legislation, and when it fails to deploy its vast resources to avoid harms generated on their platforms, courts or an independent regulator should be free to decide if someone was harmed by their inaction and how much they should pay in restitution. Senior executives of tech companies should be held accountable for their conduct because they are administrators of platforms that hold enormous power over our society. Not just in terms of content moderation, but also the amplification of content, the institutional and user experience, design of their systems, equity in user experience for marginalized communities. So what can we do? Look, tech companies' playbook is well worn and well documented. Deny there's a problem, deflect blame, delay taking action. But people are demanding action. And governments around the world are starting to take action to limit the harmful excesses of social media giants, from the Digital Services Act in the European Union, the Online Safety Bill in the United Kingdom, and growing calls for action from both sides of the aisle in the United States. Change is possible, and it is starting. But legislative and regulatory frameworks have been too slow to keep up with the fast-moving and ever-changing digital landscape. The constant evolution of technology means that lawmakers and regulators have kind of had to run to catch up with the harms arising in online spaces every day, those that as users we see all the time. Politicians will act, but only when we come together with a clear voice to demand change. And change is in our hands, therefore. Our hands, pushing together, have bent the moral arc of history towards justice time and time again. But it doesn't happen on its own. It takes the goodness, the wisdom, the collective will of us all to do it. And it's time for one more push. Let's protect our kids. Let's protect ourselves. Let's protect our societies. Protect our democracy. Join us at the Centre for Countering Digital Hate and demand change today. The STAR framework is the first step to safer, more collectively prosperous, more enjoyable, more equitable social media.